Hello. You may hear the noise of my clock. The clock is ticking. This is sort of rather a useful metaphor. Today is Holocaust Memorial Day, and I've been looking for a candle to light. I can't find one. But if you have a candle, today is the day to light one. We need to remember all those who have died in the Holocaust and in other genocides. This means really we need to encourage tolerance, cooperation, light in the darkest places. So I take a certain amount of heart from the fact that Mr. Putin and Mr. Biden have been speaking. Mr. Putin may still be refusing to mention Mr. Navalny's name, but he's doing a lot of talking about it in various places. So yesterday he spoke to Mr. Biden. What they spoke about is very interesting. It amounts to a discussion about very dodgy behaviour. The SolarWinds espionage, cyber espionage, and the influence over elections, as well as the arrest of protesters and the detention of Alexei Navalny. There were positives as well, because Russia and the US now plan to extend the START treaty, which otherwise would expire at the end of this week, and there's planning to be cooperation over the COVID pandemic. But just to complete the record of dodginess, in Moscow's press briefing about the telephone call, there was not one word about Alexei Navalny. Interesting. I'm afraid, however positively I want to view what is said on the official media in Russia, and I really do, I have to realize, and I have to recognize that I was personally badly stung by Russian media itself when I was dubbed with words I never said in a news interview a couple of years ago. This was for NTV's flagship program in Russia called Itogi Nedeli, hosted by Rada Zaynalova. And even when I produced proof in the form of an iPhone copy of the original interview that we had made with the cameraman's permission while he was filming the interview, it did very little, and there was never an official apology or a public recognition that the interview was fake. The episode quietly disappeared, in fact, online. So now you can't find it. However, I was one of two people who were duped in this particular way. The other one was a far more august psephologist. That's somebody who studies how elections work, a fellow called Professor John Curtis, who is routinely wheeled out at elections, and he works in the University of Strathclyde. Now, Professor Curtis said that the dubbing of his interview was inaccurate. In fact, he said it was a complete misrepresentation of what he said. And NTV is not the only channel in Russia that seems to routinely put words into the mouths of foreign interviewees. Russia One got caught doing something similar to the right-wing French politician Bruno Le Maire. So with this in view, I think I need to look very carefully, or we need to look very carefully at Mr. Putin's defense on TV to students, which took place a few days ago. There's a very, very, very long program. Mr. Putin is not given to brevity. He said in the course of this long, long interview that violence by some protesters was unacceptable. Well, the evidence that I've seen on newsreels and on photographs and footage posted on Twitter and YouTube suggests that the only violence was done by the police, not by the protesters. And that individual people in these protests were targeted by the police. Margarita Udina, in fact, was arrested and beaten badly in the protest on Saturday, and she's become a sort of poster character, and further protests are now planned in the next few days. My own instinct is that possibly the day of the mass protest is fast coming to an end, and there must be other ways to think of getting across this message of protest. Now, as for these protests, they seem smaller than protests which took place in Russia in 2012. But they also seem more significant, and they stretch over not just one city or two cities, St. Petersburg and Moscow, but over at least 100 cities across Russia. Now, in 2012, the opposition did not have a leader, unless, of course, you recognize the importance of Hillary Clinton. But now, the opposition does have a leader, even though he might be in prison and facing potentially a very long prison sentence. He may indeed even die in prison. And the revelations about Putin's palace continue to shock. Putin said to the students the other day, there's no evidence that he owns the palace or that anyone in his family owns it, but that's not the issue. It was never alleged that he owned that palace, only that somebody had bought it for his use. And actually here I would say, why not? In a way, why not give it to Mr. Putin? If that's the price of Mr. Putin's retirement, some people might argue that that is a small price to pay for him to go away. And if the amount of talking that is now being done about the events on Saturday is any indication of how seriously Mr. Putin and the Kremlin view the current protests and the current unrest, then maybe we can see that Mr. Putin is recognizing that his days as president are coming to an end. So at the moment, maybe we need to think, how can we make this as easy as possible for him to go with speed? So anyway, those are my thoughts at the moment. And do by all means subscribe, do add your comments and be controversial if you wish. Let's stimulate some sort of debate. And otherwise, if you can find one, light a candle for Holocaust Memorial Day. Bye-bye.